Well, it finally happened. I finally got an actual quality second turntable. I'm sure a lot of you will remember the infamous Crosley Collegiate All-in-One in the background of most of my reviews. Well, that unit had been sitting unused on my table for over a year after I realized how low quality the design on it was. But this summer I finally decided to ditch that plastic wonder and get a turntable that would sound great and wouldn't leave me wondering if I was crushing my record's grooves. So, after looking around, I got this. This is a direct drive 2-speed turntable made by a company called ProLinear in the early 80s, I believe. To be precise, it's a ProLinear DDS-MKII. I got this used from a man in my local area who runs a record store and also refurbishes audio equipment on the side. I've been looking for a used turntable like this for a little while, and this one seemed to have everything I needed. A good solid platter, a reliable motor, and a properly adjusted tone arm with a good cartridge. And it sounds great. It does just what it's supposed to do. It keeps the record at a steady speed, the cartridge and the arm track the groove accurately, and it produces a very clear, detailed sound with a low noise floor. I also like that this is a semi-automatic model, so when we reach the end of a side, the arm lifts up, returns, and shuts off the table automatically. There's also these two button controls on the right side. The DDS-MKII doesn't use a lever to lift up the arm. You press this button to raise it up. And you can tell that it's physically controlling the mechanism because you need to press firmly. Then, to lower it down on the spot you want, just press the button again, and the arm comes down slowly and gently onto the groove. And next to that button is the reject button, and that will lift up the needle and return to the dock immediately. I guess that saves a little bit of time compared to manually lifting the arm. And over here on the left side there's the speed setting for 33 1/3 and 45 RPM, and the pitch control for the direct drive motor. It's a nice, solid, minimal design. Another reason why I chose this turntable is that it had been retuned and calibrated before it was sold. Whenever the guy I bought it from gets a used turntable, he cleans it out, oils the drive components, and aligns and sets up the cartridge. And he does it at a pretty reasonable price. So this little cartridge here has had its overhang and alignment set, the azimuth adjusted, and the tracking force and anti-skate set. When I bought it, he actually warned me, don't touch the counterweight or the anti-skate unless you're replacing the cartridge, because those are just right and you'll throw them off. He had that tone in his voice that people who own turntables get when their friends come over and start touching their equipment. It's the tone you get when you've spent hours setting up your record player just right and you're worried someone's about to throw it out of whack. But anyway, he'll be glad to know that I didn't adjust any of this. It's all great. What I did have to adjust was the speed of the drive. Now, I don't know for sure how long this table had sat on the shelf before I bought it, but I guess the pitch control got a little bit dusty between the time he adjusted it and the time I got it. The first time I turned this unit on, the platter spun noticeably slower. And that brings me to another thing I like about this turntable. It has a built-in strobe light and hash marks on the platter to measure exactly how accurately it's spinning. So I adjusted the pitch wheel a little bit, but I noticed that the motor at first wouldn't speed up immediately. Then after I got it to the right speed, it would suddenly either speed up or slow down a little more. It's not that the pitch was constantly wobbling, but more that the motor decided that it wanted to go faster or slower all of a sudden. So my brother and I decided to clean out and re-oil the motor and the pitch dial again. My brother got the motor's parts all greased up again where they needed it, and I fill it with the pitch dial to get it to stabilize. Since then, the DDS-MKII has been running pretty darn reliably. It keeps a constant speed with no noticeable wobble or flutter. I have sometimes had to make small adjustments to the speed where I put a heavier or lighter record on, but that seems to be par for the course when it comes to direct drives that aren't quartz locked. So that's how the turntable itself works. Now here's how I amplify it. I have it plugged into a Behringer Microphono PP440 preamplifier. I'm not sure why it's called micro though, since it's fairly thick, but it's a nice sturdy unit made out of aluminum, and it does its job very well. It sits here behind the turntable, it boosts the signal from the cartridge, it applies the RIAA curve, and not much else. Now, this is a budget preamp, I didn't spend too much money on this, but it still sounds very transparent and neutral. I hope someday I'll be able to drop $6 on a Macintosh amp, but for now this is great. I picked a Behringer preamp because I bought an analog to digital USB converter from them a while ago, and I've been really happy with how well it's worked ever since. You'll notice that even though there's a ground here, it's not being used, and that's because the ProLinear DDS-MKII is self-grounded. And I like that idea. If you can ground a machine internally, why bother putting one more wire on the back of it? From the preamp, we move down to the final amplification stage, and here's where things might get a bit controversial. I'm using an SMSL SA160 amplifier. Now, some people don't like SMSL because their amplifiers are more budget-oriented, and some people find they produce a hiss in the signal. I personally don't find that's the case with mine. There is a hiss if I turn the volume way up, which might be a deal breaker for people who really want to guarantee that their audio is pure. But when I have the volume at normal listening levels, even high listening levels, that hiss is so low that I can't reliably tell if I'm actually hearing it, even when I listen closely. And if I can't actually say for sure that a noise is in the signal, I consider it irrelevant. I like the SA160 because it has both a headphone output and speaker outputs. I plan on getting speakers for this thing soon, but right now I'm using this as a headphone only setup. My speaker listening is still done on the turntable downstairs. So it's good to be able to use headphones and speakers on here because a lot of SMSL models have only one or the other. One thing I don't like is that they use an 1/8" headphone jack instead of a 1/4". My Sennheiser headphones and a lot of other good headphones use a 1/4" jack by default, so to plug these in I have to use the big, clunky, monstrous 1/8" adapter that hangs way out from the device. It would be so much more graceful if it was a 1/4" jack, because even if your headphones have an 1/8" plug, the adapter for those takes much less room. Maybe the depth of the 1/4" jack wouldn't leave room for the circuitry, but I'd be fine with them making the case a little wider or a little longer. It still would be very small. But hey, I guess I should be grateful I got a jack at all, given that Apple has declared them obsolete. The SMSL sounds excellent. Together, it and the Behringer preamp create a crisp, accurate sound that seems quite neutral across the spectrum. The frequency response is very good, and this unit can also get very loud. I usually keep the volume low, around the 1 or 1.5 position, depending on the record. This unit is small, but it packs a punch. Okay, so those are the components of the setup, but how does it actually sound when you play a record on it? Well, in short, it sounds very good. This turntable came fitted with a cartridge that was used, but still in fine working condition. The seller said that he checked the stylus with a microscope and found it spotless, and based on my listening, I think he was right. This cartridge doesn't have any name on the body itself, so I can't tell precisely who made it, but based on some web research, I think it might be a CR2500 ProLinear moving magnet cartridge, since ProLinear lists this one on their website. However, it may not be, because the page where it's listed describes it as a P-mount cartridge, which this isn't. Plus, I'm not even certain that this is the same ProLinear company that made my turntable, but I'll explain that later. At any rate, I do know that the stylus on the front is a Piezo YM127. This unit gives a clear, fairly detailed sound across the bass, mid-range, and treble. There's a good soundstage when you're listening to it. It brings out the details of the music, usually without any part becoming lost or muddled in the mix. Drums, bass, vocals, guitars, pianos, horns, strings, cymbals, most instruments sound clear and precise, even the parts that are quiet enough to be close to the noise floor. The upper treble is also well reproduced, with frequencies up to and beyond 20 kHz being captured distinctly. The cartridge does a good job of presenting your music with detail without any part becoming overemphasized, and it makes for a very enjoyable listen.
Tom Sawyer, he gets high on you, and the space he invades, he gets by on you.
I was actually surprised to find out that the Piezo YM127 uses a conical stylus, since I would normally expect an elliptical stylus to create a sound like this. It just goes to show you how sometimes products can be better than you think when you try them unbiased. Now, is this a great cartridge? Well, not quite. It does have its limitations which show why it's a budget cartridge. The tracking becomes a little shaky on inner grooves, sounds become less faithful and more sibilant on a lot of records. It's not terrible and it won't ruin your listening experience, but it's still not the best. The stylus can also get a bit overwhelmed during complicated passages. Arrangements with lots of instruments or sudden crescendos can make the sound a little fuzzy for a bit. I also find that this stylus is more prone to skipping than my other setup. I have several older records that have nicks and scratches on them. My Nagaoka MP110, which tracks half a gram lighter than this one, can usually navigate these bumps with just a click or a pop as it passes by. This one, though, has gotten stuck or skipped forward on a few scratches that didn't seem like a big deal for the Nagaoka. I'm not sure if that's the tracking force or a different cantilever or a stylus design, but it has been an issue on a few records. Another thing that doesn't measure up to the MP110 is the cart's overall sound. Yes, this cartridge is detailed and fairly accurate across the sound spectrum, with nothing becoming overwhelming or muted, but the result lacks some of the vibrancy and presence, there's that word, that I hear with the Nagaoka. The sound feels more detached here, as if the needle is reading the details but isn't really engaging with them. This is particularly noticeable on the bass section. The bass is certainly there, but it often lacks the power and resonance that it has on my other setup. Drum rolls just aren't as imposing as they can be. There's also times when certain details in the mid-range don't seem to pop out like they should, but that's not quite as noticeable.
So I won't let you close enough to hurt me. No, I won't ask you to just desert me.
So this cartridge creates a good, detailed sound for a budget cartridge, but overall I'm inclined to say that its accuracy and sound presentation are not the best I've heard. It's not a bad cartridge by any means, trust me, I've listened to Crosley's before, but the sound signature isn't quite what I like. This, of course, is my opinion. You may prefer a cartridge with a flatter, less emphasized sound, in which case, go for it. However, you'll probably have a hard time getting this exact cartridge make, since I can't even find the model of it. It's perfectly listenable, but I think my next upgrade to this setup will be a new cartridge. Overall, I'm quite happy with this simple little setup I've made. It gives me another place where I can enjoy my records and tinker with my audio equipment. Everything's working well and I really enjoy listening to it. And that's really what you should be looking for when you get a turntable. Just one more thing before I go. As I mentioned before, I found there's something unusual about this turntable, and that is its brand name. There seems to be shockingly little information about ProLinear online, to the point where I wouldn't be surprised if you've never heard of it. After I got this one set up, I did some searching out of curiosity to see if there was any documentation on it or comments from other people who owned a DDS, but all I could find were various classified ads from people selling it. Even the huge database of turntable models on Vinyl Engine didn't have a single entry for ProLinear. From the small amount of information I could find, it seems like ProLinear was a Canadian audio company based in Vancouver that made entry to mid-range turntables around the 70s and 80s. Apparently they're still in business too, since they have an active website that advertises their audio equipment. Looks like they mostly make speakers and home theater equipment now, but they do have a section for turntables. I thought the mystery might be solved when I first clicked on it, but they only have 2 models listed that they're currently making, and don't mention the DDS-MKII anywhere. Contacting them about my model got no reply. I'm almost certain that this is the same company that made my turntable, but as yet there isn't definitive proof. So for all I know, the company could have changed ownership completely since the 80s and no longer have any real connection to this big gray box I've got here. I did at least find another vintage turntable model made by ProLinear from around the same time period, the AT-1600. At least we know from this that the DDS wasn't just a one-off model made by some non-existent organization. Judging by the look of the DDS-MKII and the AT-1600, it seems to me that ProLinear's designs borrowed from other popular turntable brands. The AT-1600 looks suspiciously similar to the Dual 1214, and the DDS-MKII has a very similar style to the Technics SLQ-300 from about the same period it was made. Both of them use the same straight, lightweight tone arm style that was popular with some manufacturers at the time, and they both have a minimal design with a few control buttons or switches at the front. But I suppose there's nothing wrong with using a similar style to another brand if you can also make a quality product, and these definitely aren't similar enough to break any patents, so yeah, more power to them. I'm happy having a Canadian Technics clone for a turntable. Well, thanks for watching everyone, and here's to better record players. And since I seem to have bought a turntable from my home country without even realizing it, I feel obligated to play this for the outro.